Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the latest dump of the Epstein files and examine the recent interview in Vanity Fair with the White House Chief of Staff that exposed the inner workings at the top of the American government as a collection of misfits and miscreants, incompetent zealots, and disturbed individuals led by an egomaniacal narcissist with an alcoholic's personality. Joining us is Sidney Blumenthal, the former assistant and senior advisor to President Bill Clinton and senior advisor to Hillary Clinton. He's been a national staff reporter for the Washington Post, Washington editor and staff writer for the New Yorker, and his books include the bestsellers The Clinton Wars, The Rise of the Counter-Establishment, and The Permanent Campaign. His latest book is All the Powers on Earth, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1856 to 1860. He's the co-host of the podcast The Court of History, and we'll discuss his latest article at The Guardian, Is Susie Wiles an Innocent Bystander in Trump's White House? Then we'll speak with a reporter whose video of a West Bank settler beating and almost killing an unarmed 53-year-old Palestinian woman went viral and led to the rare arrest of a 21-year-old Messianic zealot and member of what is called the Hilltop Youth. Joining us is Jasper Nathaniel, a Brooklyn-based writer and reporter covering politics, culture, and international affairs. He covers Israel's occupation of the West Bank and publishes weekly analysis on Israel-Palestine through his Substack newsletter, Infinite Jazz, where he has an article we will discuss, Inside the Machine of Annexation. And before we begin, as this year ends and you can make tax-deductible donations for 2025, I'm hoping you consider backgroundbriefing.org/donate and publictruthmedia.org for your charitable giving, since we produce a daily news analysis program covering the major stories in the news 5 days a week on a very modest budget, and have recently expanded our production team from 2 people, that's me and Graham, to 5 employees as we expand our social media presence and have a new Gen Z reporter to engage the future generation in a coalition of boomers and zoomers out to make America decent and sane again, and the world a better place for all. So happy holidays to you, and the very best in the new year as we expand our fact-based community in post-truth America. And joining us now is Sidney Blumenthal, the former assistant and senior advisor to President Bill Clinton, and his latest article at The Guardian is Susie Wiles an Innocent Bystander in Trump's White House? Welcome to Background Briefing, Sidney Blumenthal.
Glad to be here, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And I've interviewed Chris Whipple over the years, and he certainly managed to get a lot of extraordinary comments from the White House Chief of Staff on tape. And of course, they have ritually denied that they said what has been recorded, or said that it's all taken out of context and stuff like that. Why do you think she hasn't been taken to the woodshed?
Well, first of all, let's just explain what happened. Susie Wiles is the chief of staff to Donald Trump. She was his campaign manager in 2024, brought him to victory. She ran a much more disciplined campaign in 2024 than he has had campaigns in the past. She's an experienced political operative. She knows all about talking to the press. She gave 11 interviews to Christopher Whipple, who has written a book on chiefs of staff. Apparently he acted as her psychiatrist because she completely opened up to him on the record. He published 2 parts in Vanity Fair in which she had unvarnished opinions about everybody, including Donald Trump, who she called somebody who has an alcoholic's personality. And she is very clear that she does not like apparently anyone in there. Now, what happens to her? You're leaping to the end of the story, which we haven't seen yet. And my intuition, which I raise as a question mark at the end of my piece in The Guardian today, is that Donald Trump does not like being insulted. And he has been humiliated by her. his very own chief of staff. And so he will, given who he is, engage in humiliation. But he may do it as a slow drip torture until she is forced to resign. Or he can blame her for things that go wrong as they happen down the line. But if I were her, offering her career advice right now, it would be to leave immediately before any of that inevitably happens.
Well, if you go back to the first term, he had a whole bunch of chiefs of staff, and they were referred to as the adults in the room, and they tried to restrain and sort of sidetrack his worst impulses, which are just about everything that he thinks and does, because he's a terrible person, and he's an ignorant, woefully, dangerously ignorant person with really very, very cruel ideas. And there's plenty ample evidence that's come from people like Miles Taylor and others who were in the room.
I think you're being too mild, Ian. But go
Okay,
on.
well, I'm saying that, but this time around, it seems that Susie Wiles has decided not to be the adult in the room. At least she is in terms of confessing to Chris Whipple. But it's a very strange thing, isn't it, to not to do anything about somebody that you complain about later.
She's the enabler in the room. She
Hmm.
says in the in Whipple's piece, "I am not an enabler." That's an echo to me that sounds very Nixonian. I am not a crook. Why would you raise that on your own? I am not an enabler, if that was not in your mind, that you might well be an enabler. And according to the confessions of Susie Wiles, as told to Christopher Whipple in Vanity Fair, she's very much the enabler who acquiesces, gives in, rationalizes, and supports all of the Trump craziness.
So, is there any? I mean, I guess she brought in Rubio, right? And my understanding is that the co-president is Stephen Miller. I've never understood what the role is of the deputy chief of staff vis-a-vis the chief of staff. So how does this operate? Does she have any, if she can't do anything about Trump and is enabling him, what's her relationship with Miller, who seems to be the sort of dark whisperer in Trump's ear?
He's not
Who,
a whisperer. He's as if the dictator were really organizing and leading things. He was the Führer. No, Trump is, as Wiles explains in the piece, somebody who does not know what the departments and agencies are in the government, doesn't know how they operate, and frankly doesn't care. Now, she also says that she tells Trump, "I'm the chief of staff and I'm in charge of the staff, not of you." In other words, I will do nothing to um, put you in line or make you obey the law or the rules or standards or norms, but I will deal with the staff and make sure that they support your lunacy. But she's actually not the chief of staff because, as you point out, Ian, she's not the chief of Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is, even though he's below her in the line of authority in that chart as her deputy, she's not in charge of him. He does whatever he wants. And he's in charge of most things in the White House operationally, but particularly in terms of creating a quasi police state, using immigration and deportation and ICE as his mechanism. And he also plays, as we learned in Signalgate, a huge role in foreign policy. And we don't know everything that he's doing. There's very little transparency about him.
well, that's what I was going to bring up. This was a signal gate because it's so obvious that he's in charge, and certainly J.D. Vance is not, because at the end of that conversation, which was shared with a journalist, the Miller orders the bombing of Yemen. he pulls the trigger. So it's an extraordinary situation. Now, is it true, Sidney, that Susie Wiles brought in to the White House Marco Rubio to have an adult in the room? Because we're told that when she was not around at some point was when Trump chose the disastrous Matt Gaetz as the Attorney General. Now, not that the successor is any better, but I think by all recognition, he would have been a catastrophe. So the idea is that if she's not around, Trump does really stupid things. So therefore, she brings in the only adult to temper things and perhaps curtail the influence of Stephen Miller. But that doesn't appear to be the case, right?
Well, Wiles comes from Florida, and that's where she made her political chops. And she was key in the invention of Marco Rubio as political figure. Um, and they have a long relationship that predates Trump. Rubio is one of the few people she doesn't attack in the Vanity Fair piece. She has something bad to say about almost everybody, defining them in terms of their pathologies. Quirky Bobby, she calls Bobby Kennedy Jr. Elon Musk, of course, is a drug addict who's essentially out of his mind. Uh, she does not like J.D. Vance, who she says has been a conspiracy theorist for more than a decade, and she considers him to be a rank opportunist without a core, clearly. Um,
Russ Vought is a
yeah, Russell
right-wing
Vought,
absolute.
the former head of Project 2025, which he's implementing from the Office of Management and Budget, she calls a right-wing absolute zealot. That's not a compliment in her book. She, I mean, she does not like a lot of these people she's working with, and clearly, how she defines Trump is somebody who is part of this rogues gallery of addicts and pathological characters, an alcoholic personality.
The amazing stuff is that she says that both she and Trump were blindsided by Ghislaine Maxwell's release from prison to this Club Fed down in Texas. And they were apparently, she says that Trump was upset about it. Well, who's running the show? Do you really believe that the Deputy Attorney General went off on his own and decided to do that softball interview and somehow give her this cushy prison where she gets to play with puppies?
Well, Susie Wiles doesn't like Pam Bondi either and trashes her and blames her for the Epstein files blowing up into a political issue for Trump. Um, and then she says she talks too much. She talks way too much. She says she's read the Epstein file. He's in the file. He hasn't done anything awful, she says, but by the way, he and Epstein were sort of young single. And then she says, I know it's a passe word, but sort of young single playboys together. They were in their 40s and 50s. They're not single young. This is ridiculous. And then she says Trump lied about Bill Clinton being on Epstein's island. Says he's wrong. So, and this is a problem for her, legally, perhaps, because Epstein's victims could subpoena her in one of the many lawsuits they're engaged in to ask her about the redactions in the files and what she's read. Has she waived executive privilege? Well, perhaps by speaking to Christopher Whipple. And she could be asked any number of questions about what she read or learned about Epstein, Trump, their actions together as, quote, playboys, and whether Melania is named or depicted. So she could be in a world of trouble, perhaps.
Let's now take a brief station break and be back in a moment, continuing the conversation with Sidney Blumenthal.
Had to look good
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And we're continuing the conversation with Sidney Blumenthal, the former assistant and senior advisor to President Bill Clinton, and the co-host of the podcast, The Court of History. So since you work for Bill Clinton, Sidney Blumenthal, how is he responding to this? Because the fact that Susie Wiles, said that he was never on the island, and Trump claims Clinton went to the island 28 times. Clearly,
Well, that might be the number of times Trump went then.
right now we're learning from this late. Yeah, we're learning
But
from
we're
this.
learning he went he was on the plane a lot. That's
Yeah,
what.
right, and that's in the latest tranche that just came out today. So, what's Clinton's best move here to
Well,
get?
Bill Clinton, through his office, has issued a statement calling for the release of any and all documents relating to him, that he has nothing to hide. He's not protecting anything. And if anybody feels they're protected, you know, they should also call, everybody should call for the release of any and all documents. So he's been completely open about this and thrown it essentially on, open. So what happened is this: in the first tranche of documents that were released this week by Trump's Department of Justice, they released several photographs of Bill Clinton without context to distract from Trump, and didn't release virtually anything about Trump except a photograph of Trump with some girls in bikinis that was in Epstein's drawer, that they then tried to delete and then brought back. So this was an attempt to smear Bill Clinton, and change the subject and dangle some bright, shiny object in front of the people in the press, away from Trump's involvement and long history with Jeffrey Epstein as predators, chasing women, young and old. And we know that for a fact. It's been extensively reported, including recently in a very long piece in the New York Times.
Yeah,
So,
I was going to bring
so
that up,
that's
Sydney.
that
Yeah.
is that's what's going on here, with former President Clinton. And I have not seen Donald Trump call for the full release of any and all documents and files that, um, or those that relate to him. And as the sitting president, he has the full and complete authority to release them all at any moment. And the Department of Justice right now is in violation of the law under the Epstein Transparency Act, which called for the release of all documents on December 19th. So this is where we are.
Well, you mentioned earlier Melania Trump as well. I mean, uh, according to Michael Wolff, she was hanging out with Epstein in the 1980s, and he claims that she was introduced to Trump by Epstein, and they later married in, I think, 2004 or 2005. There's a huge reputation washing operation going on, financed by Jeff Bezos to the tune of about $42 million. A film that's going to be released into the theaters, featuring Melania Trump, and the director, Brett Ratner, who's high on the Me Too list. There's a picture of him that was just released today with that dreadful French pimp that ran a modeling agency.
Yeah,
So,
so you make a very good point, Ian. One of the photographs that was released without context or explanation was of a man named Brett Ratner hugging another shirtless man named Jean-Luc Brunel. Well, who are these people? Well, it turns out Brett Ratner is the director of the new film about Melania that will come out in January to whitewash her. And he was accused by numerous women of sexual assault and harassment and misconduct. He fled the country and took up Israeli citizenship, in fact. Donald Trump has recently asked the head of Paramount, uh, young David Ellison, to revive Rush Hour, a film series that Ratner had produced, and he's now been given a contract for Rush Hour 4. He's the director of the Melania movie. He was hugging Jean-Luc Brunel. Jean-Luc Brunel, to come to the end of the story, ran modeling agencies, was very closely related to Jeffrey Epstein. And they were partners in a modeling agency at one point. Uh, MC2 was created by Brunel in Miami, that was, and Epstein and Trump were very close to Brunel, their pictures. And Brunel was arrested by the French police for human trafficking, rape, and money laundering, and was found hanged in a Paris jail cell in 2021, 2 years after Epstein. So that picture shows a very close relationship between Brett Ratner, who is close to the Trumps, both Melania and Donald, and is making the Melania movie and is being given favors through Donald's intimidating coercion of Paramount after having granted them a merger, essentially through bribery. Um, and we're looking at a squalid and sordid scene of every sort of corruption.
Well, since you brought up the Ellisons, who bought CBS, and they put uh, Barry Weiss in there, and we've seen exactly what the agenda is there, where she spiked a story, a 60 Minutes story that would be critical of the Trump administration, and then is now telling 60 Minutes they have to re-edit the show and interview Stephen Miller for the piece. So that's just shows you where she's coming from, where they hired her and she's pleasing Trump. And that is the whole point. Out here in Hollywood, they're so brain dead, Sidney. The Writers Guild and Cameron and all these people are railing against the Netflix deal with Warner's, when the Ellisons, who are up the ante, they're trying to buy Warner's in order to buy CNN at Trump's behest, because Trump wants to, and they've already promised they're going to fire everybody that Trump doesn't like on CNN. So this is incredibly short-sighted. If they go ahead and if Trump ends up owning or controlling CNN along with CBS, we're going to be in Putin's Russia when it comes to the media. This is a bigger issue than streaming versus theatrical release.
Yeah, we're watching in real time the creation of an authoritarian imposed media, and we're watching the crisis take place in front of our eyes in 60 minutes. Now, in my article in The Guardian about Susie Wiles, I point out that she had qualms about Stephen Miller's cruel crusade against immigrants and mass deportation and ICE roundups. And she raised questions because they're children with cancer and being separated from mothers and so on. And he just runs right over her. She gets run over all the time. And now we have this situation at 60 Minutes where Barry Weiss, at the very last minute after this segment has been reviewed 5 times internally by the lawyers and the standards department. It throws up, you know, um, uh, questions to prevent it from going on the air because they haven't called Stephen Miller. Now, she says that when the White House doesn't comment and they ask for comment repeatedly, that's not good enough, that they need to have them on the air when they don't want to. Well, apparently, if you offer a no comment from the White House, you can kill a piece now on 60 Minutes. I worked in the White House. I didn't know I could kill pieces in the press by saying no comment. This is something completely new in terms of the government and press relationship that Barry Weiss is pioneering. It's something new in journalism. She really should give a lecture at a journalism school about this new wrinkle in journalism that she is innovating.
Well, but she's not really a journalist. She's an opinionator, isn't she?
About her, I will simply note that decades ago, CBS broadcast Ted Mack's original amateur hour.
So, in terms of the Ellisons, though, they've upped the ante. He's going to put a lot more money in it. And I noticed that Jared Kushner pulled out of the deal. There's a lot of Saudi money in the deal as well. It's a pretty unsavory bunch of people that are trying to buy Warner Brothers. So, and Oracle itself, its stock is doing well because of AI, which is all a pumped up bubble any rate. But it's way down in the bond territory into junk bonds. So it's a kind of a paradoxical situation.
Well, I don't know what, David Ellison thinks he's bought himself to become a titan of Hollywood, and he's very powerful and he can determine this, that, and the other thing in that world, but he needs to speak to a lawyer or somebody else who can explain to him that time does not stand still, that he is a young man, and that in a short period of time, there could well be a Democratic Congress, and they may well investigate Paramount for bribing Donald Trump. And there may well be, sooner than he knows, a Democratic president and a different Department of Justice that may seek to restore the rule of law and look into all the bribery that took place under Donald Trump and all the corruption. And he could be in trouble. We don't know. But he needs to speak to a lawyer who has a larger perspective. He is not getting, I would say, proper counsel.
So, just in closing, Sidney Blumenthal, since we are getting to the end of this year, how do you see this next 2026 as being such a critical year? It feels as though, given the Democratic successes in a number of races that have just taken place over the last few months, that this could be a real possibility for the Democrats to take back the House, even the Senate. So do you think that in 2026 we'll see the beginning of the end of Trump's reign of ruin?
Well, what we're going to see is the possibility of the Democrats taking control of one or both houses of Congress. One race that people did not pay much attention to was a state Senate race. It took place about a week or so ago in Kentucky. It was a Democratic district in Louisville. Harris won it by 6, but the Democratic candidate for state Senate just a couple weeks ago won it by 50 points. I don't know if that's going to be the margin, but we do know that the CBS poll this week showed a 14-point generic. I urge everybody who's listening to take that generic and put it in Chat GPT or whatever your favorite AI tool is, and ask them if the generic number is 14 points favoring the Democrats for winning the House of Representatives in the 2026 election. How many seats will the Democrats have and the Republicans? And the answer is going to be a mind-blowing blue wave like you've never seen. So we'll see if that holds. The material factors, which consultants often dismiss, thinking that everything is about their messaging, are going to continue to drive ordinary people away from Trump and open their eyes and feel if they were at all ever supporting him, that they were betrayed, um, because uh, as what's euphemistically called the affordability crisis continues to press down on them, which means a lot of economic factors across the board.
Well, Sidney
So
Bloom,
we're going to face a very big political upheaval this year. And in the face of it, Trump will get worse and worse and more desperate. So that will only contribute to the blue wave.
well, Sidney Blumenthal, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And I've been speaking with Sidney Blumenthal, the former assistant and senior advisor to President Bill Clinton and a senior advisor to Hillary Clinton. He has been a national staff reporter for the Washington Post, Washington editor and staff writer for the New Yorker, and his books include the bestsellers The Clinton Wars, The Rise of the Counter-Establishment, and The Permanent Campaign. His latest book is All the Powers on Earth, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1856 to 1860. He is the co-host of the podcast The Court of History, and his latest article at The Guardian is Susie Wiles an innocent bystander in Trump's White House? We're going to take a brief station break and back speaking with the reporter whose video of a West Bank settler beating and almost killing an unarmed 53-year-old Palestinian woman went viral and led to a rare arrest.
Several years of rubies and pearls are at her breast. She's a demon, she's a demon, she's a demon lover, just like all the rest. But while she's a filling out her wings, in the many shades of contentment she brings, I got to hide it, baby, because of you. And I hope that you're proud. All I can do.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Jasper Nathaniel, a Brooklyn-based writer and reporter covering politics, culture, and international affairs. He covers Israel's occupation of the West Bank and publishes weekly analysis on Israel-Palestine through his Substack newsletter, Infinite Jazz, where he has an article, Inside the Machine of Annexation. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jasper Nathaniel.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jasper. And you filmed and witnessed a young settler, Edri, a 21-year-old settler, who beat up an elderly Palestinian woman, a 53-year-old Afaf Abu Alia, in a West Bank village of Turmas Ayar. The suspect, Ariel Edri, was a resident of a West Bank outpost near the Ofra settlement. And this is one of the rare occasions where there's been some justice, if you will, if I can use that word, in terms of the IDF and the police arresting this person. But it's clearly a far more complicated situation than that. And you've written about it in an article called Good Settler, Bad Settler. So just tell us about how you came to be in this situation, to witness a terrible situation where a 21-year-old young man beat up a 53-year-old woman who had to go to hospital. I believe she was actually, in pretty bad shape when she got there and was lucky to survive.
Yeah. So it happened in a town called Turmasaya on October 19th this year, so just about 2 months ago. And it was the first day of the olive harvest for this town. And so, the olive harvest in the West Bank and for Palestinians is a very important time, both because it has sort of deep significance. I mean, a lot of the locals there are picking the same olive trees that their great-grandparents picked, decades and decades ago, but also because it's, for a lot of these people, it's their livelihood. They harvest olives and they send them to the press and they sell it as olive oil. But in Turmasaya, the olive fields have been occupied by violent settlers for the past several months. And so what that actually looks like is, if you think about this Palestinian village, It's a very well-developed village, like beautiful homes and shops. And then directly abutting it are these olive fields where the Palestinians who own the land there, who all live in this town, have built like farmhouses and they have their equipment out there. But now when you look out, what you see is an ever-growing, metastasizing settler outpost where an infamously violent settler named Amishav Mellet he basically went out, started by putting down a tent and a flag, and then that turned into a tent, a flag, and a container, and then two containers, and then suddenly any farmer who tried to get out to their land would get beat up. And it's just grown and grown to the point where the Palestinians are now not able to get to their own land. And they literally can see from their windows that violent settlers are living in the farmhouses that they've built, preventing them from getting to them. So on October 19th, the town basically decided collectively that all the farmers of the village would go out together as one group to, hope for some protection in numbers. And it was, to be blunt, it was a bloodbath. From the moment we got out there, we were threatened by a settler with a gun. It turned out it was Amishav Mellet, the leader that I mentioned before. He was talking on the phone, clearly coordinating with other settlers. Later in the day, we were blocked in by settlers who would not let us pass, so we tried to go another way. There were IDF soldiers, Israeli soldiers there. We asked them to help escort us out of the olive fields. We told them that we were being threatened. There were settlers right there that they could see. They promised to help us, and then they drove away and left us alone with these settlers. It was then that this huge mob came and attacked us, running with clubs, throwing rocks, setting cars on fire, and I ran for my life. And I reached basically the bottom of the hill, and that's where I witnessed this one settler go out and strike the woman in the head, knocked her clean unconscious, and then he stood over her, struck her twice more. And the attack lasted maybe 5-6 minutes. The Israeli military said the next day that they told the press the next day that they had arrived and dispersed the confrontation, which is just a complete fabrication. Not only did they not arrive, but they were there right before it started and, led us right into it. So yeah, I've been traveling to the West Bank reporting for years, and I've seen a lot of violence, but this was the most coordinated, violent assault that I've witnessed in my time.
But the object appears to be to deny the Palestinians their livelihood, right? Don't they depend upon the olive harvest?
It's to deny the Palestinians of their livelihood, and also it's very straightforward. It's to steal the land. I mean, there is now a winery in the on private Palestinian land that's using grapes grown in private Palestinian grape fields. Yes, they are harvesting the Palestinians' olives, but also, these olive fields are basically had been the last buffer zone protecting the village of Termisaya from a giant settlement or a large settlement called Shiloh, where attacks often come from. But now that the settlers have taken the olive fields, they are directly up against the town, and the people in the town are afraid that they're going to start launching attacks in the villages on their homes where their families are staying. And so it's more than just stealing their livelihood. I mean, that's certainly part of it, but it's really an existential threat to the town itself.
So this leader of these settlers, who are euphemistically called the Hilltop Youth, he's got political connections, does he not?
Absolutely. There was actually just an expose in an Israeli paper where somebody from within the IDF, an officer within the IDF, detailed how the Israeli military in the West Bank is coordinating directly with settler leaders like Amishav Mellet to help them basically turn their stolen land into authorized Israeli settlements. And so the way it works is, these violent settlers, in some cases, they call themselves the Hilltop Youth. This is what I call the bad settlers and the good settler, bad settler dichotomy. These bad settlers, these are the ones you see in internet clips, attacking people. They go out, they launch attacks, they steal land. Sometimes when it gets bad enough, the members of the Israeli government will come out and condemn them, say that they don't represent us. But then quietly, the IDF then, provides security to this new outpost, and then they help them, map out new roads that they're going to build from the outpost to the settlement. And then you blink, and these illegal outposts have been authorized by the Israeli government. Just last week, 19 new settlements were created, including what had started as outposts that were seized by these violent settlers. So what this could look like in Termasaya is you've got this guy, Amishav Mellet, who is infamous. He's known to the Israeli authorities as being violent and leading these violent settlers. Right now, like you said, they went out and they arrested the guy who clubbed the woman, but that means absolutely nothing if they're going to continue giving resources to this guy and eventually, turn it into an actual Israeli settlement.
But doesn't the IDF Central Command, led by Major General Avi Bluth, coordinate with Smotrich, the minister in charge?
Absolutely. And Smotrich is, he's the finance minister in Israel, but he's also, he's a settler himself. 20 years ago when he was young, he was one of the Hilltop Youth running around the hills. And he basically, when he came into power in early 2023, he pulled off this sort of remarkable bureaucratic coup where he installed himself in the defense ministry so he could then effectively run all of the entire sort of bureaucratic apparatus that oversees the West Bank. And so what Smotrich has done is created a system where he's cleared all the guardrails and made it incredibly easy for settlers to create new settlements, which used to be a process that has all sorts of red tape. And Avi Bluth, who is, nominally in charge of policing the West Bank, and frankly, he comes out and he condemns violent settlers and he says they're cracking down. He is then going and working directly with the violent settlers to, like I said, help them legitimize what they're doing. So look, when the violence in the West Bank gets bad enough and bad clips start to surface, there's pressure that builds in Israel, and the authorities have to come out and start condemning it. But it's clear that is a pressure release valve, because behind closed doors, everything that they're doing is just facilitating, helping these violent settlers effectively be the sort of the vanguard of the movement and to pioneer new land.
But your video of what happened in the attack on the 53-year-old Palestinian woman, that became viral, did it not? I mean, the video did reach the Israeli people. I mean, they have, as far as I know, they haven't really seen much of what's happened in this long and agonizing war in Gaza because of essentially, I don't know whether it's imposed censorship or voluntary censorship, and they won't let journalists in there, and there's been an awful lot of Palestinian journalists killed in this long, horrible war. So what's the situation vis-a-vis what the Israeli public get to see about the behavior of their fellow citizens, the so-called Hilltop Youth?
Yeah, the Israeli public knows about the spiraling violence in the West Bank. And, I don't know what the exact numbers look like, but I would say a healthy percentage of the Israeli public does not like to see these videos. Frankly, they think it makes them look bad. It's a bad look for Israel. But the settlers are very good at framing what they're doing as being a sort of protective buffer for Israel. So the settlers love to say, there never would have been an October 7th out of the West Bank because we would have stopped them. Unlike Gaza, where there are no Israeli settlers, they were able to just come right through. And so a lot of people in Israel, they might not agree with the settlement movement. They might, condemn the violence. But at the end of the day, if they are going to put a stop to this violence, it's going to require a actual meaningful movement to actually extract 750,000 settlers from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And, among other reasons why that's not going to happen, it's because a lot of Israelis consider the settlements to be basically their bulletproof vest, and security just trumps everything else for most people in Israel.
And doesn't the U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee visit the settlement that you mentioned, where they are producing wine from Palestinian grapes?
Absolutely. Mike Huckabee is a true friend to the settler movement. He visits Shiloh often, and he works closely with settler leaders to, look, the settlers call the West Bank Judea and Samaria. It refers to the ancient kingdoms of Israel, Judea and Samaria, in the south and the north. And Huckabee is an evangelical Christian, and, he believes in the same sort of biblical reading. And of course, for him, the reason that he wants Jewish people there is more, for like an end times belief, not because of any, actual, I don't think it's because he cares about Jewish people, but at the end of the day, he is ideologically aligned with the settlers because of his own religious beliefs. And he also has come out and condemned settler violence. He actually met with the father of a Palestinian American, Saifullah Musalet, who was beaten to death by settlers, and he called it terrorism, and he said they were going to get justice, and then he did literally nothing. And so, I think it's pretty much universally, or almost universally considered in the mainstream, that these violent settlers are bad. But that saying that they're bad, condemning them, is different from, working behind the scenes to support them, which is what Huckabee and the Israeli government in large part is doing.
So since you've obviously had interactions with these settlers and the so-called hilltop youth, some of them quite dangerous, they're armed, they harass you with weapons and drove you away after you managed to film one of them beating up this 53-year-old Palestinian woman and almost killing her. And that video went viral, and that character got arrested. Let me just touch on that a little bit before I get to the rest of what I want to say. What's the situation vis-a-vis, because this guy's arrest, very infrequently do they get arrested, and even fewer times do they get convicted. And as far as I know, that there haven't been too many people, if any at all, who've actually been held accountable for the murder of Palestinians. Yeah,
that's exactly right. It's very clear that the arrest happened because the video got so much coverage, and the video is just, it's unimpeachable. Like, you see a large man clubbing a defenseless older woman. And I think that, this was a rare instance where Israel was forced to act. But again, I just want to emphasize that if there's a mafia hit and the police go out and arrest the hitman and act as if they've solved the problem, and they've done nothing to, go up the chain into the actual mob family, they've done nothing. This guy who clubbed the woman, Ariel Dahari, he's a foot soldier. He's not an ideological leader of the movement. He's not like Amishav Meled or any, one of these other ones who are really connected with the government. He's dispensable. And I think that if they need to make a sacrificial lamb out of him to, tell the world that they are addressing violence, there's really not much downside to that when they get to leave the system intact.
But I want to get to the question which bothers me, and that is, what makes these people tick? What motivates them? I mean, you say in your article that they argue that the land was promised to the Jews by God, as though God is their realtor. But what makes them tick? Why do they have this violence? Why do they have this hatred of Palestinians? What is their ideology? What's their motivation? I don't understand. I've seen, and I saw some footage as well in preparing for this interview, of settlers beating up a bunch of Palestinians inside a bus, which was just horrendous. So it's hard for me to process. So have you been able to figure out why they do what they do?
Yeah, I think that it's very hard to find the line between, what is a sincere sort of messianic belief and what is territorial ambition and what is, just pure hatred and racism, because all three of those are there. I mean, I have interviewed settlers and talked to settlers before, and they all talk about all of those things. They believe that the land was promised to them. It makes no difference to them that there's people living there. As you said, God is their realtor as far as they're concerned. But they are just as quick to, describe every Palestinian as a terrorist, or, they talk about them like they're cockroaches that they need to step on, or just, force out of the house, basically. And then also, there's a people who have lived there now for generations. I mean, the settlement movement has existed since the 60s. And so the young people there now, their parents and maybe their grandparents were settlers before. This is their home, and they just want the whole thing. I mean, they want the Palestinians out so they can take all of the land. So I think that I would like to be able to say it is pure messianism, or it's pure racism or hatred, but or just, a land grab. But I really think it's all of those things together. And I'll just add that, what's interesting when you talk to settlers is that they really believe that they are adhering to the promise of Zionism, which, was about Jews returning to the land that they had been kicked out of thousands of years ago. And they're very quick to say, listen, if Jews have a right to be in Tel Aviv because of some ancient connection to the land, then we have much more right to be here in Samaria or East Jerusalem or other parts of the West Bank, where they're exactly right. There is much more archaeological record of Jewish people there. The problem is the archaeological record does not determine international law, because if it did, then the entire world order would collapse. And so, I bring that up because, a lot of people believe that the settlement movement is not a sort of distinct separate entity from Zionism or from Israel, that it's just the natural progression, that once you open Pandora's box and you start claiming this is ours because of our history, you're just going to keep going and going. And, there's settlers who are going into Syria, into Lebanon, certainly into Gaza. So it's unclear where exactly it stops.
But just in the last couple of minutes, though, Jasper, do any of these settlers see the terrible irony of when they call Palestinians cockroaches, that it was only 80 years ago that their ancestors, their Jewish ancestors, were called vermin by the Nazis, who proceeded to exterminate the Jews in Europe?
That's a good question. I think the irony is either lost on them, or they really, I'm generalizing here, but the more extremist settlers that I've spoken to, I mean, they really have thoroughly dehumanized the Palestinians, to the point that I think that they believe what they're saying, that, not that they are literally cockroaches, but that they are less human, and that they are like fundamentally bad and violent. And so when they believe that, there's no comparison to Jewish people, which I'm sure is not that dissimilar from what some Nazis thought, during the Third Reich. So it is extremely disturbing. I mean, I had a settler say to me once, the only difference between now and then is that we have the weapons and the power now, so we'll kill them before they kill us, sort of likening the Palestinians to the Nazis. So I do think a lot of the irony is lost on them, but I really think more than anything else, it's just a deep-seated hatred that, obscures that fact.
So just in closing then, is there a gulf between the settlers and the rest of the Israelis? How much of the population, I mean, you're not a pollster, but do they share the messianic idea? Because as far as I can tell, you can blame Netanyahu for Israel just as much as you can blame Trump for what's happened to the United States. But I'm just wondering at what point there is a kind of consensus about the fate of the Palestinians, which the right wing in Israel is basically making life so miserable for them that they hope that they'll just slink off to Jordan or Egypt or somewhere, and they'll have the land for themselves. And that, obviously, the Palestinians are resisting that. But on the other hand, after October the 7th, I can imagine that most people in Israel are pretty resigned to the idea that, you simply can't cohabit with the Palestinians. So where does things stand from your observation?
Well, I think the last thing you said is certainly true, that any sort of willingness to try for coexistence has been all but abandoned by the vast majority of the society. In terms of the question of this chasm between the let's say the secular Israeli public and the religious settlers, I mean, I would liken it to maybe 2015 or 2016 when Donald Trump had stormed the Republican Party and this MAGA movement was developing, and I think a lot of normal people thought, well, the Republicans are going to, they're going to get this out of their party because, this is so extreme and they don't stand for this. And gradually, MAGA just took over the party. And today, you can't even imagine a Republican Party without MAGA. MAGA is the Republican Party. And so I think that it's similar in that a lot of Israelis see this settlement movement and they feel it's too extreme for them, and they don't want to be associated with it. But they're just not, willing to expend the energy or the political or social capital to actually end this movement. And so it will keep growing in power. It has more political, the settlement movement has more political power than it's ever had. And so at a certain point, if there are still Israelis that are against the settlement movement, and there certainly are, if they have virtually no power to stop it and they're smaller and smaller in numbers, then I think, any gulf that still exists is effectively meaningless.
Well, Jasper, Nathaniel, I thank you so much for joining us here today. You really educated me.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
And again, I've been speaking with Jasper Nathaniel, who's a Brooklyn-based writer and reporter covering politics, culture, and international affairs. He covers Israel's occupation of the West Bank and publishes weekly analysis on Israel-Palestine through his Substack newsletter, Infinite Jazz, where he has an article, Inside the Machine of Annexation. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.